Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and we have a really fascinating one lined up for you today.
Yeah, we really do. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into this source material.
So, to start us off, I want you to imagine for a second imagine that humanity is running on a computer operating system.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right. So, for thousands of years, basically since we stopped chasing mammoths and started planting wheat, we've been running what you could call agrarian OS.
The Agrarian OS, yeah.
Yeah.
The farming update.
Exactly. And it's a stable build,
Right.
it works, but man, is it slow. I mean, everything is local, everything is handcrafted, and the speed of life is literally, well, it's the speed of a horse.
Right, and critically on that old OS, your life trajectory is pretty much a flat line. I mean, if your grandfather was a farmer and your father was a farmer, then guess what?
You're going to be a
They're
farmer.
going to be a farmer. The software just didn't really allow for much else. There wasn't much social mobility.
But then suddenly, in the mid-18th century, in this rainy little island off the coast of Europe, someone forces a massive update.
A total system reboot.
Yeah. The screen flickers, the fans start screaming, and we switch to the industrial operating system. And the crazy thing is, we never went back.
We couldn't go back even if we wanted to. It's a great analogy because just like a major software update, this wasn't just, a fresh coat of paint. It completely rewired the hardware of human society.
It really
It
did.
changed how we eat, where we live, how we define our value, and ultimately who runs the world.
And that is exactly what our mission is for today's deep dive. We are unpacking the Industrial Revolution. Specifically, we're looking through the lens of AP Human Geography Topic 7.1. It's called The Industrial Engine of Global Transformation.
Right, but our goal today isn't just to talk about steam engines and soot.
No, we really need to go much deeper than the smokestacks. Because the research we have in front of us today, it creates this incredible narrative. It links a simple farming tool in the 1700s directly to the geopolitical map of the 21st century.
We're going to trace how this explosion of technology in Britain essentially created a permanent divide. A divide between the haves and the have-nots of the global economy.
What the sources call the core and the periphery.
Exactly, the core and the periphery. And as we'll see as we go through this, that divide didn't just happen by accident. It was basically engineered.
So looking at the roadmap for this deep dive, we've got three main layers to get through for you. We need the origin story, so why Britain? Then we have the social upheaval, like what did this actually do to the humans living through it? And finally, the big geopolitical layer.
The second wave of imperialism.
Right. Before we get to the empires, you really latched onto something in our notes regarding the very, very beginning of this process.
I did. It's actually the hook for me today. Because you usually think of factories and cities as the opposite of farms, right?
Sure, yeah, urban versus rural. It's the classic dichotomy.
But the research points out this massive irony. The Industrial Revolution didn't actually start in the city.
It started in the dirt.
It started in the dirt. It turns out just a few simple upgrades to farming equipment are the direct reason why we have crowded city apartments today.
It's the domino effect. You cannot have an industrial revolution without an agricultural revolution first.
Right. It's physically impossible. You need the food.
We're going to circle back to exactly how a seed drill creates a factory worker in just a minute. But first, let's set the stage a bit, because the sources ask a very specific historical question.
Why Great Britain?
Exactly. Why not France? Or why not China, which was incredibly advanced at the time?
It's the million-dollar question. And to answer it, I think we have to define what industrialization actually is first.
Okay, let's define it.
Technically speaking, it's the shift from a cottage industry system to a factory system. So before this shift, if you needed a shirt, you went to a weaver's cottage.
It's bespoke. It's basically Etsy before the internet existed.
It is Etsy.
Oh.
And it's slow, it's expensive, and it's heavily decentralized. Industrialization centralizes all of that. It puts the machine in charge of the pacing, not the human.
Right.
Now, for that shift to happen in Britain first, the text describes it almost like a recipe. You needed a convergence of three very specific ingredients.
Let's break down that recipe for the listeners. So ingredient number one is the physical stuff, geography and natural resources.
Right. Because you can't build a modern economy on good vibes alone. You need actual energy.
And Britain was sitting on massive, very accessible deposits of coal.
That's your fuel. And they also had iron ore, which is your primary building material for the new machines. But here's the kicker. A lot of places have coal and iron.
Yeah, Russia has massive amounts of coal and iron.
Exactly. So what was the differentiator for Britain? Water. And I don't just mean for water wheels, though that was part of it. Britain is an island, but it's also crisscrossed with all these navigable rivers and canals.
Which is huge for transportation.
Right, because in the 1700s, moving heavy coal by horse and cart was just a total logistical nightmare. It was incredibly expensive to do.
The friction of distance was just too high.
Precisely. But floating it down a river on a barge? That's dirt cheap. So Britain's geography made it economically viable to actually move the raw materials to where they needed to go. They were physically wired for commerce.
Okay, so they won the geographic lottery. But you can have all the coal in the world, and if you're broke, you still can't build a factory. Which brings us to ingredient number 2.
Economic assets or capital.
This is where the history gets a bit more complex, right? Because the text mentions capital and colonial trade networks. We should probably be clear about what that actually means.
Yeah, it's important. Britain had a lot of liquid cash floating around its economy. And you have to ask, where did that come from?
Well, it came from the previous couple of centuries of trade. The sugar, the tobacco, the Atlantic trade routes.
Right, there was all this accumulated wealth in the system that was basically just looking for something to do.
Yeah.
Investors had money, and crucially, they were actually willing to bet that money on new technology.
Which leads right into the third ingredient, because you need a safe place to make that kind of bet, political stability.
This one is huge. Think about it. If I'm going to build a massive textile mill, that is a 20-year investment. I need to know that the government isn't going to collapse next Tuesday.
Or seize your property.
Exactly. I need to know my property rights are respected. And Britain had a legal system and a government that, especially compared to many of its neighbors at the time, was remarkably stable and very pro-business.
So it's this perfect convergence. You have the fuel, which is the coal. You have the funding, the capital, and you have the permit, the stability.
And if you remove any one of those 3 legs, the stool falls over. The revolution probably happens somewhere else or maybe a century later.
Okay, so the stage is officially set. Britain is ready to launch. Now let's go back to that Tech 2 step we mentioned earlier, the farm and the factory.
The logic here is brutal, but it's very simple. To have a factory system, you need workers.
Lots of them.
Lots of them. But you don't just need workers. You need workers who aren't currently farming. If everyone is busy growing their own food just to survive, nobody has the time to weave cotton in a factory for 14 hours a day.
So you need a massive food surplus.
You need to feed the growing city, but you need to do it with fewer people actually working the land. And that is where the agricultural innovations come in. The notes highlight 3 distinct gadgets.
The seed drill, the mechanical reaper, and the steel plow.
Let's take the seed drill. It sounds boring, but the text makes it sound completely revolutionary.
It really was. Before Jethro Tull invented the seed drill, farmers would literally just throw seeds on the ground.
Just tossing them out there.
Yeah, it's called broadcasting. And birds eat them, they blow away in the wind, they don't root deep enough. It's incredibly wasteful. But the drill planted the seeds in perfect rows at the exact perfect depth.
So your crop yield and efficiency just goes up.
It skyrockets, and then the mechanical reaper comes along, and suddenly one guy on a machine can harvest as much wheat as 20 guys swinging scythes.
And this is where the sort of social Darwinism of economics kicks in. Because these new machines, they weren't free.
No, they were huge capital investments.
Right. The wealthy landowners could afford them, but the small peasant farmers just couldn't. So the wealthy farm produces way more food, much cheaper, and the small farmer just can't compete with those prices.
So what do? They sell out.
They sell their land to the large commercial operations. And this was often aided by laws like the Enclosure Acts, which essentially privatized what used to be common land. So now look at the situation you're in.
You are a former farmer with no land.
You have no land, you have no job, and no way to feed your family. But you hear there's wage work up in Manchester.
And that is the Great Migration. The enclosure movement and the farm technology literally evicted the labor force that the factories so desperately needed.
It's what we call the creation of a wage labor force. People who have absolutely nothing to sell but their own time.
So all these people fled into the cities. And what are they actually walking into? What are the manufacturing innovations waiting for them?
Initially, it's textiles. It's almost always textiles first because everyone in the world needs clothes. You had inventions like the spinning jenny and the water frame.
Right.
These machines allowed a single worker to spin dozens, and then eventually hundreds, of spools of thread all at once.
But the text singles out one very specific invention as the real game changer here. the Watt steam engine.
Oh yeah, the steam engine is the moment the industrial OS fully installs. Because before steam, your big machines were powered by water wheels.
Which meant your factory absolutely had to be next to a fast-moving river.
You were completely tethered to geography.
And rivers freeze in the winter, they flood in the spring, they dry up in the summer.
Exactly, it's unreliable. But the steam engine creates power by boiling water with coal. Now, you can put your factory anywhere you want. You can put it right in the middle of a dense city. You can put it right next to a coal mine. It untethered the industry from nature.
And doing that unleashed this concept of economies of scale. I want to make sure we really nail this concept for you because it comes up in the AP curriculum constantly.
It's a fancy term for a very simple idea. Volume kills cost.
Right.
Think about it. If I make a pair of shoes by hand, it takes me all day. I have to charge you for a full day's labor plus the leather and materials.
Right.
That shoe is going to be expensive.
But if you have a machine,
If I have a steam-powered machine that spits out 1,000 shoes an hour, the labor cost per individual shoe is basically zero. The price drops right to the floor.
which means suddenly everyday normal people can actually afford things that used to be considered luxury items.
He created the mass consumer market as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally the reason you have a closet full of clothes today instead of just owning 2 shirts.
But there is a very heavy price tag attached to all this cheap stuff. It just wasn't paid in money. It was paid in human misery. Let's shift gears and talk about the social upheaval.
Yeah, it was a pretty grim reality for the working class. We have to look at the demographics first. We mentioned earlier that there was more food. Well, biologically speaking, more food equals more babies.
And fewer deaths.
Right. Nutrition improved drastically across the board because of that agricultural revolution, so fewer people died of starvation. Their immune systems were stronger, so the global population just spiked.
And all those new people are cramming into industrial cities, places like London, Manchester, Liverpool. And the description of these cities in the sources is just visceral.
It's horrific. We throw around the word urbanization, and it sounds like a very clean civil engineering project. But in reality, it was just chaos.
The infrastructure was not there at all.
No sewage systems, no clean drinking water, no zoning laws whatsoever. You had entire large families packed into these damp cellar tenements. Diseases like cholera and tuberculosis were just running rampant because of the population density.
And the work itself. Inside the factories.
Dangerous and deafening. We're talking 14-hour days, widespread child labor, no safety guards on any of the massive machines. People were essentially treated as disposable parts of the mechanism itself.
Yeah, if you got hurt on the job, you were just fired.
Exactly. There was absolutely no safety net.
And this harsh environment created a totally new kind of social structure. The text talks about a class restructuring. We essentially stopped defining people by their birth title, whether you're a duke or a peasant, and started defining them by their relationship to the factory.
It's severely polarized society. Up at the very top, you have the capitalist class.
The notes actually refer to them as the fancy pants.
Yeah, the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
The people who actually own the machines, the factory buildings, and the capital. They are the ones making all the profit. And then down at the bottom, you have the working class, or the proletariat.
They own nothing but their ability to labor.
Right. But there's a third group that emerges here too, right?
The middle class.
And this group is really important for political stability later on down the line. The factory system got so massive and complex that it needed managers, it needed accountants, lawyers, engineers to fix the machines.
And the workers needed teachers and doctors.
Exactly. This middle class grew right in the gap between the super rich and the incredibly poor. They became a buffer zone.
It's really interesting how identity shifted here. The notes point out that people started identifying much more with their economic class than their geographic location.
Well, think about it. If you're a poor coal miner in Wales, you start to realize you actually have a lot more in common with a poor coal miner in Pennsylvania than you do with the wealthy owner of your own mine who lives just up the hill.
It created a shared class consciousness.
Which eventually led to labor unions, strikes, and massive political movements.
So the Industrial Revolution completely transforms Great Britain. It totally rewires their entire society. But capital is restless. It doesn't just stay put. It diffused.
It went viral, essentially. It spread outward to Belgium, then Germany, the United States, basically places that had similar recipe ingredients to Britain.
And this is the major pivot to the geopolitical side of things, it didn't spread everywhere.
No, it didn't. And this is where we get the critical concept of core versus periphery. This is central to the AP Human Geography curriculum. The entire world basically split into two opposing camps.
Break that down for us. What makes a core nation?
The core nations are the ones that successfully industrialize. They have the modern factories, the big banks, the high-value production, and because of that, they accumulate massive, unprecedented wealth and military power. They become the sun in the global solar system.
And the periphery.
These are the nations that did not industrialize, often because they were intentionally prevented from doing so or because they were outright colonized. Their role in the new global economy became purely supportive.
They just provide the raw materials for the core to use.
Exactly.
And this leads us directly into what the text calls the second wave of imperialism. Because empires weren't a new concept, obviously, but the actual motivation behind them changed.
The motivation became purely industrial. If you are a powerful core nation, your factories are these hungry beasts that never sleep. And they have two major cravings. First, they need to eat. They need raw materials. We're talking rubber, oil, cotton, tin.
And you can't find all of that sitting around in Europe.
No, you have to go take it from somewhere else.
And what was the second craving?
Well, they need to vomit.
Wow. Okay, that is a deeply gross metaphor.
I know, but it's economically accurate. These factories were so hyper-efficient that they produced way more stuff than their own domestic populations could ever possibly buy. They desperately needed new markets. They needed to dump that massive surplus somewhere to keep profits up.
So you conquer a foreign territory not just to steal their gold like in the old days, but to force them to buy your extra shirts.
It's the ultimate captive market. You control the supply and you control the demand. You go to the colony and say, you can only trade with us, and you have to buy our manufactured goods.
We actually have two case studies in the notes that perfectly illustrate this dynamic: India and Africa. Let's look at India first, because the textile connection there is really tragic.
It is. A lot of people forget that before the 1800s, India was actually the textile capital of the world. They made the absolute best cotton cloth, the finest muslins.
So what happened when Britain took over?
When Britain took control through the East India Company, they didn't just try to compete fairly. They systematically dismantled India's entire domestic industry.
How did they manage that?
Through aggressive tariffs, taxes, and harsh regulations.
Yeah.
They effectively converted the entire subcontinent of India into one giant cotton farm. So India grew the raw cotton. It was shipped all the way to Manchester to be spun into cloth by British machines. And then Britain shipped the finished cloth back to India and forced the Indians to buy it.
Completely undercutting all the local weavers who just couldn't compete with the price of machine-made goods.
Exactly. India became a resource pit and a forced customer base all at once. The value add, the actual profit from the manufacturing process, stayed firmly in Britain. That is the classic core periphery trap. You extract the value and you just leave the labor behind.
And then we have the case study of Africa, specifically the Berlin Conference.
This is truly the peak of imperial arrogance. It's 1884. The major European powers, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, and a few others, they literally sit around a big table in Berlin. They have a massive map of Africa and a ruler, and they just carved up the continent.
And they weren't drawing these new borders based on where people actually lived or where the rivers flowed naturally or anything like that.
Not at all. They completely ignored existing tribal boundaries, complex linguistic groups, centuries of cultural history. They just drew straight lines around resources. They basically said, okay, Belgium, you get the rubber in the Congo. Britain, you take the gold and the diamonds down in the south.
It was just a blatant resource grab.
Pure extraction.
Yeah.
And the really lasting tragedy is that those arbitrary lines drawn on the map in Berlin are largely still the borders of those countries today. Yeah, so when we see ethnic conflicts in Africa right now or ongoing economic instability, a huge amount of it traces directly back to the fact that these nations were designed from the ground up as extraction zones for Europe. They were never designed as functioning, cohesive countries for the people actually living there.
It brings us right back to that initial idea we started with, the engine of inequality. The massive global disparity we see today didn't just happen by some historical accident.
No, it was deliberately engineered. The sheer industrial advantage gave the core nations the power to lock the periphery nations into a permanently subordinate role. And once that specific economic cycle starts, where the rich get richer and the poor become totally dependent, it is incredibly hard to break out of.
Because the core uses its accumulated wealth to maintain the very system that created the wealth in the first place.
Exactly.
It's a pretty sobering realization when you step back and look at it. We've gone from a simple seed drill in a muddy British field to a modern global map defined entirely by who owns the factories and who owns the dirt.
It's the butterfly effect, but with steam engines. A relatively localized shift in production technology eventually redrew the borders of the entire world.
So bringing this all home for the listener today, why does this history matter right now? I mean, aside from passing their AP Human Geography exam, of course.
It matters deeply because we are literally still living in the house that the Industrial Revolution built. The modern global supply chains, the geographic location of wealth, the divide between the global north and the global south, it's all still operating on that version 1.0 software that got installed back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
You really can't understand modern geopolitics without understanding this initial shift.
And the sources offer a final provocation on this that I think is really worth chewing on.
Yeah, I thought this was a brilliant point. The source material frames industrialization as the specific moment power shifted to those who control manufacturing. But if you look around today, we are currently right in the middle of another massive operating system update.
The AI and digital revolution.
Right. So the big question is, are we seeing a true reshuffling of the deck right now? Are entirely new nations going to become the new core? Or is this new digital technology just reinforcing the exact same map from the 1800s?
Think about it. Who currently owns the massive server farms? Who owns the advanced microchips?
And maybe more importantly, who is providing the raw material, which today is the data to train all these AI models? It looks awfully similar to the old map. The fancy pants are now sitting in Silicon Valley, and the rest of the world might just be turning into the data mines, providing the cheap, raw input for the algorithm.
Are we all just becoming digital sharecroppers in the new economy?
That is definitely the question to keep you up at night. Are we actually breaking the historical cycle, or are we just digitizing it?
Well, on that cheerful and slightly terrifying note, thank you so much for breaking all of this down with me. This has been a truly fascinating look at the engine that still drives our world.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
And thank you to everyone out there for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.